All right, today we're going to talk about the age of exploration. But before we get started, remember that not only are we answering the questions as they pop up, but you need to be writing this stuff in your notebook so that you can look back at it later. So these are your notes. Write them in your notebook. Now, what was the age of exploration? So from the 1400s to the 1700s, Europeans experienced this age of exploration. And the Renaissance encouraged curiosity and a desire for trade. And if we look at this time frame, the 1400s to the 1700s, this age of exploration is happening at the same time as the Renaissance, so it's still overlapping. As a result of this exploration we're about to learn about, European nations grew powerful and spread their influence throughout the world. But how did they do this? So, trade and cultural diffusion during the Renaissance introduced new navigation techniques and technologies to Europeans. So, one of those would be the magnetic compass, which made sailing a lot more accurate. So, if you think of a compass that you might use today, or even if you've seen like a compass app before on the phone, it points to true north, and based off of that, you can tell what direction you are going. They also had the astrolabe that used stars to show the direction. So if you see, they kind of look through this little hole. They use angles with the ocean as the horizon and the stars to tell what direction they're going in. Also, maps were a lot more accurate and they used latitude and longitude, so they could pinpoint exact locations on the globe. One more invention was the caravel, which was a new and better ship. So it was a strong ship that could travel in open seas and in shallow water. So it was a ship that could really travel in any kind of water. It also had triangular sails that allowed it to sail against the wind. So if the wind is blowing right at them, if it was a really strong wind, it might blow them backwards. But with these sails that they had, they could push against the wind and keep going forward. They also had a movable rudder that made it more maneuverable. So a rudder is kind of like a board underneath that moves side to side to steer it left and right. It also had cannons and rifles that gave it protection. So if another ship attacked, they would be protected. Now, why did they do this? And it can really all be boiled down to the three G's: gold, God, and glory. And we'll get a little bit more in depth with each one of these. So our first one is gold. A desire for new sources of wealth, so new ways to make money, was the main reason for European exploration. The Crusades and the Renaissance increased Europe's desire for exotic Asian luxury goods. So if you remember from sixth grade, you learned about the Silk Road, which we see on the map, which is the way that they would typically get to Asia to get all these goods. Goods like spices, cotton, precious gems, ivory. We got gold and silver. We have porcelain, perfumes, silk itself. All of these things they wanted to get, but they wanted to find a way to go to get there that wasn't on land so they didn't run into anyone. So merchants, so people who are buying and selling things, began looking for quick, direct trade routes to Asia to avoid Muslim and Italian merchants and increase their profits. So they wanted to find a way to get to Asia, to get to all those goods without running into anyone else. And God, our second G. So European nations or Christians, usually Catholics, wanted to stop the spread of Islam and convert non-Christians to become Christian. So explorers were encouraged to spread Christianity, And a lot of them brought missionaries with them whose only focus was to convert the natives. So some of these people were on these expeditions. They explored to find these goods all over the world. But some of the people on these expeditions, their goal was to get people to become Christian. And glory. The Renaissance inspired new possibilities for power and prestige. And remember, when we're talking about this time, that idea of humanism is still really, really important. People are believing that they can change the world, they can do great things, they can be the first person to discover a new place, they can be the first person to travel a specific route. They believe they can do great things and get the notoriety and the fame from it. So it gave people the opportunity to rise from poverty and gain fame, fortune, and status. So they get money, they get fame, and people know who they are. There were kings who sponsored these voyages. When I say sponsored, I mean they gave them money and ships and supplies. So kings who sponsored voyages gained overseas colonies, new sources of wealth, and increased their power. So they had land overseas that they owned, new sources of wealth from these new lands, and more power because they had lands overseas. Now, the first country to really lead the way was Portugal. And Prince Henry the Navigator was a huge reason why Portugal was able to do this, to be the pioneer. So while he did not actually sail anywhere, he opened a school of navigation to train sailors. He was training people how to sail. He brought in Europe's best map makers, ship makers, and sailing instructors. So they were having the best maps, the best ships, and the best know-how of how to sail and go to different places. He wanted to discover new territories, find a quick trade route to Asia, like we talked about before, and expand Portugal's power. So some people who traveled for Portugal was Bartholomew Diaz, and he reached the southern tip of Africa. So if we look at this map, we see he starts here in Portugal. He goes around Africa and then down to the bottom, and he stops at the southern tip of Africa. But then another sailor comes around named Vasco da Gama, and he goes that same route. He goes around Africa to the southern tip, but then he goes past it to actually make it to Asia, to make it to India. So he keeps going around Africa and then makes it to India, which is one of those places in Asia that Europeans wanted to go to. Now, while Spain was training sailors, making their way to Africa and India, or while Portugal was doing that, I'm sorry, I think I said the wrong thing. The Spanish government saw Portugal's success and they're like, I want a piece of that. I don't want to be left out. I want that fame and that money. So, more than any other monarch, so king or queen, Ferdinand and Isabel of Spain sponsored and supported the most overseas expeditions. And one of the people that they sent on an expedition was Christopher Columbus. So, like most educated men of the Renaissance, Christopher Columbus believed that the world was round, because a lot of people at that time still believed that the world was flat. So because he believed the world was round, he thought he could reach Asia by sailing west. So instead of going around Africa, he could sail west and go all the way around the globe. He reached the Bahamas in America, but thought he was in the islands right off of India. So he made 4 of these trips to the Bahamas, thinking that he was in India before he realized he landed in the wrong place. And if we look at this map, if he's starting in Spain, his goal, here's Spain, here's India. His goal is to go all the way around the globe and make it to India. But what he does is he still sails west, and when he runs into land, he just assumes that he's in India. But really, he's in the Bahamas. So he made it maybe halfway there. Another man who traveled for Spain was Ferdinand Magellan. So even though Columbus never found India, Magellan thought that he could. And Magellan, he did that. He sailed west, he made it to India, and he made it back to Spain. So he was the first explorer to circumnavigate the globe. And circumnavigate is just a big word for going all the way around the world. So if we look here, this red is Spain, so where Spain traveled to. And so we have Christopher Columbus, who thought he made it to India, but made it to the Bahamas. And then we see this bigger red line is Magellan. So he actually goes under South America, keeps going west, and then makes it all the way to Asia and then sails back home. He was the first one to do that. So during this age of exploration, Spain created colonies in both North and South America.